Perspective with Mike and Amy. I'm Mike Thomas, and with me is co-host Amy Bishop. And this program is part of an education series through the St. Clair County Speak Youth Coalition and is funded in part by Region 10 in partnership with the St. Clair County Health Department and local organizations in the Blue Water area. Last week, we had a chance to share with you a little bit about some of the particular drugs and their negative effects. We focused primarily on the most common accessible substances to teens, which are alcohol, tobacco, and marijuana. We also gave some general information through our MiFi data, which if you'd like to go back and play our part one, gives you information on depression, other relationship issues, as well as number of kids using and some of the data that goes with vaping and other products in our local area. But this week we want to talk a little bit more about some of the other substances that aren't as commonly used, but are extremely dangerous in many cases and can be just as problematic, if not fatal. And so we're going to start off with opiates. Now, in many cases, opiates can be available through prescription medication, not always being used appropriately, or in some cases, accidental use can be a problem. But aside from just pill form, there can be some other opportunities to get access to opiates. So prescription medication, when mixed with alcohol, can definitely be fatal for any teen. And so it's important that, one, you stick with the prescription if you are going to take that through your doctor, but also that it's not mixed with other substances, okay? Because opiates in general, they're GABA reactive. GABA is a chemical that is a calming neurotransmitter. It helps suppress lung function. And if you use too much of that, it can actually stop you from breathing. When people OD on opiates like fentanyl, heroin, and pills, it can actually slow down their respiration rate to a point where they suffocate. And so when people OD, that's what kills them in many cases, is they stop breathing. And so that can be a problem with prescription pills as well as the other ones. Beyond that, when we're talking about heroin and fentanyl, I guess one way of saying it is if you're looking at morphine as a base, heroin can be 2 to 5 times stronger than morphine, and fentanyl can be anywhere from 50 to 100 times stronger. So those are some pretty substantial increases for drugs. And so when we're talking about opiates, these can be a real danger. Heroin in and of itself is problematic because in many ways people use it with needles. There's risk for infectious disease. But beyond that too, very common, like you see with meth, some people will have their saliva growth inhibited in their mouth, and they actually, when they're not brushing their teeth and they don't have the saliva production, can actually lose their teeth at levels just like with meth and other drugs. So there's issues there. The withdrawals are horrible feeling as well too, in that a lot of times people will feel like they're achy all over, hot and cold, diarrhea and other things like that, which can last for days. And so that coming down feeling is tough because heroin in and of itself gives a very pleasurable feeling when people initially use it. And so it increases their dopamine, it affects GABA and other things like mu opioid receptors, which provide pain relief. When you're coming off of it, it does the opposite effect. So everything aches, everything feels rough. And at the same time, just people feel like a general low. And that drug, out of all the drugs, opiates are pretty much the most addictive substances that are out there. So you're most likely to be addicted to that drug than any other drug. And that's scary. Amy, do you have any other information you'd like to share as far as with opiates?
I do, Mike. I just want everybody to know that opiates are everywhere. It's been a national problem, which really started the naloxone movement, where we were able to dispense naloxone, which reversed the respiratory depression so that people would start breathing again, because that's exactly what happens is people stop breathing. That's a side effect of the opiate. And so that is, naloxone is a reversal drug or an antidote to an opiate to save someone's life so that they have the opportunity to enter recovery programs. They can't recover if they're not with us anymore. So opiates are still a concern. Some people see that our death rates have gone down, but much of that's due to our access to naloxone to save those people. So I just want to say that warning as far as opiates goes is many times people think that it's a safer option than other drugs because it's prescribed by a doctor and it's FDA approved and it's more discreet to take a pill maybe than use of other harder street drugs. And so, but that couldn't be further from the truth. Prescription drugs, like you said, and also heroin, which is another form of opiates, those are very potent drugs that hopefully you're getting what you think you are, because many times we remember the fentanyl and those stronger drugs were an issue and caused many overdoses, because what people are doing is buying in bulk and then cutting it down to the dose, but you could end up getting way more than you counted on and overdosing. So it's a lot of heartbreak. It's a big problem, and we want people to recover. So naloxone is definitely a tool to link people up with that. So we also have a very pill popping, or there's a medication for every problem or ache or pain that we have. And so we have that mentality as a people or a nation. And we have to get away from, jumping to a pill. Well, there's ice for inflammation. There's, splinting, or there's hot packs, or, there's other methods, relaxation. There's other massage. There's other methods that are non-medication type remedies. They're alternative therapies that work very, very well. And I think we have to get back to some of that mentality. And that takes modeling for our kids as well. Many times, they do what we do. And so if we turn automatically to medicating a problem instead of maybe trying other alternative methods beforehand or first, they're going to see that. So I think modeling that behavior is helpful as well. So
right. And keep in mind that things like fentanyl and that are designed for people many times when no other options available for pain management. They're at end stages of their life. It's extremely potent. So a person that has not built up a tolerance to that can definitely die immediately. Die with that without access to naloxone. And then there's other stuff that's synthetic, like carfentanil, which is designed to basically sedate large animals like rhinoceroses and elephants. A grain of that stuff can stop the human heart without the proper treatment. So scary stuff to be around. So again, we encourage people not to use that, and just understand that there isn't a pill out there that really fixes any issue. It's symptom management is really what it's all about. So if you can find those other treatments like Amy's talking about, that's great. The next one.
I want to add one more thing. Just I think also we are always conserving. We're always trying to, put things away for a later day where we might need it. And it seems that, if we've paid for medication, we shouldn't just toss it. So we are encouraging, though, we talked a couple weeks ago about, locking things up. We need to lock up our prescription medication just along with our liquor and other substances, keep them out of reach. But we also need to discard unused portions of that, because teens and even adults or people, guests in your home, if you have like just a medicine cabinet that you open, they can take that medication. Or if you have empty, leftover pills, they can access those and use them, and just to get them off the streets and get that possibility out of there. Or, there's ways to properly dispose of those medications, and that all is, with all of those different approaches, it can only help and reduce the problem that we have with opioids.
That's a good point. And we really don't want the liability if somebody's walking around and they get stopped and they've got your name and your prescription in their pocket. So that could be a liability issue for you as well. Just some thoughts to consider.
Again, lock it up. That's our message. Lock it up.
Absolutely. Looking at some of the other substances, we're going to look at stimulants next. And there's a variety of categories with that. Some of them are more benign. Like in many cases, unless you're really excessive with it, caffeine, for example, in coffee and tea, that can actually be okay for you. But what we're going to be talking about with stimulants, we're going to be looking at a few others, like along with prescriptions, like we were just talking about opiates. We'll be looking at some others that are not prescribed, like crack or powder cocaine, as well as meth. So when we're looking at stimulants, keep in mind in general, a stimulant is going to increase brain and heart activity. Okay. And so for many people, there's the pleasure of feeling alert, feeling energetic, appetite suppressant. So that, in some cases I'm having a problem eating, maybe take that, I'm not eating as much. And so it seems like initially, and that's the case with a lot of these drugs, that there's some positives to them. We're looking more at the long-term effects. And when we start out with youth, we've already mentioned how these things can be addictive, and stimulants definitely are. But there's other developmental issues that we can talk about as well with stimulants long term. And some of those things include long term brain issues. Excessive use of cocaine and stimulants like meth. Studies are starting to reveal that there can be earlier onset of Parkinson's and other mental health issues long term that as people get older, they can have problems with, as well as permanent brain damage, which in some cases can cause problems with people's motor function. I've worked with people that have had issues with that in the past as clients where so much use caused damage in their ability to move. And so uh, that's a real risk. Beyond that, there's also issues with heart problems. Many people will actually have heart attacks or other issues as a result of the wear and tear that happens to your heart. It's an organ that basically is designed to pump so much, and we're getting that thing going 90 miles an hour when we're using these stimulants. And over a period of time, it can just stop on you. So that can really decrease your life expectancy by using that too much. Tobacco is another stimulant as well too, but we discussed that in part one. So the two biggest ones that we're seeing an issue with in this area are cocaine and meth. Yes, cocaine is on the rise. We heard a lot about that in the 80s and 90s, but it's coming back. A lot of people are really getting into meth, which we'll talk about in a moment. So for a lot of the folks that are in older generations, they're bringing cocaine in. And if you're a child, like first time trying to try different things, because everybody's doing it, it's a drug that basically is almost double, if not more, what your body naturally produces with the stimulant. So that feeling is great, but those crashes are nasty. Anhedonia is basically the feeling that a person gets when they lack pleasure, which comes from a result of their lowered levels of dopamine. I know we're talking some pretty hefty science language. Sorry about that, Amy. But the truth of the matter is that feeling that people get when they crash is horrible. For some people, it's just like, it feels like the worst day on earth, just depressed and negative feeling. And that's why a lot of people keep chasing the drugs, because they want to get rid of that feeling. And that's what gets them stuck, is wanting to keep more to the point where they just want to maintain. And cocaine can definitely do that. It can also have problems with dental issues as well too. A lot of people that use these drugs, they're not taking care of their teeth. So you get things as nasty as black hairy tongue, which is really gross film on your tongue as well. A lot of times if people snort too much, they can actually have the cartilage in their nose go away or get holes in the roofs of their mouths, aside from the dental issues. With meth, it's even worse. Meth is basically 6.5 times greater than the body can actually produce for a high. And so for a lot of people, it's one of the most pleasurable experiences I'll ever have. And it's one of the worst feelings when they crash. People days on end staying up, and then they'll end up sleeping sometimes hours, if not days, while they're on this stuff. And the damage that's done to their mouth, the issues done to their mucous membranes, their nose, things like that, if we're snorting, it's pretty damaging to the body. And in the long run, again, it's more the long-term effects that we're really working with. So you start introducing this at a young age to a child, there's the long-term risk. But beyond that, too, there's always the risk for heart attack and brain damage down the road. And that's some real issues with stimulants. Anything else you want to add with that, Amy?
No, that's pretty much it. It's a scary road to take, and very potent drugs that, again, you can talk about a lifetime of addiction. And I like what you said about feeling so bad. It can feel like the worst flu, or like all these awful negative feelings. And so at that point, it's not just to seek the high, it's just to take away from all those horrible feelings of being sick. And so they think of it as, again, pill pop to make myself feel better, or take this drug, snort this drug to just feel like I can function again through my day. And so it becomes just truly an addiction just to maintain. So it's an awful thing. Again, don't start so you don't have to quit. It's sometimes a lifelong struggle.
The last category we're going to look at are just hallucinogens and synthetics. I mean, that's like a broad category. They can actually break them down more specific. But when we're talking hallucinogens, we're talking about drugs that in some cases are naturally occurring in their basic states, and others are synthetic, but they're basically designed to alter perception. In many cases, for people at parties, clubs, raves, things like that, you're going to see these more common. Most of the time, hallucinogens are not going to be as addictive as some of these other drugs. So that's why a lot of people feel they're safe. There are some issues, though, with those as well, too. With the altered perception, when we're looking at some issues with operating machinery, things like that, that can be a problem. You also run the risk of hallucinogen persistent perception disorder, HPPD. Some ways that manifests itself One of the biggest ones is going to be with flashbacks. People have probably heard from the older generations acid flashbacks, weird visual disturbances that people get days, weeks, months, sometimes even years later. Things like weird light tracers that they're going to get after the fact, or seeing things distorted in front of them. I had one guy tell me he looked at a license plate one time and it looked like it was melting in front of him, and he kind of did a double take and looked and it was gone. So weird things like that after a while. But another real possibility with excessive use or too much at one time could be a persistent psychosis. And sometimes people call it permatrip, and there's different thoughts behind that and exactly what's going on. But what I want to say is that having worked with some folks that have dealt with excessive hallucinogen use, long-term use or excessive amounts has led some people to almost come in and out of a state of reality. And that's one scary thing when you're using things as strong as LSD in others. I know there's a lot of information out there, and there's still studies being done to determine if limited amounts can help with some type of mental health issues. And I know initially when they were studying that, Dr. Hoffman, that basically came up with LSD, it thought there might be some uses. We don't have enough information, so to sit there and encourage people to take a hallucinogen, we're not going to do that. Plus, in a lot of cases when we're talking about that, we're talking about things that are made black market. We're talking about access by people that are making it themselves. Nothing that we're talking about is related really, other than we were talking about with prescription pills, things that are made, manufactured and regulated. These are things that people just make on their own. And there's always risk with what's inside of it. Is it mixed with other things, but as well, just how they process that. There's no real regulation with that. So there's some issues with hallucinogens, even mushrooms. You know, people say they're benign, they're naturally occurring. Sometimes the lookalikes can be fatal. You get the wrong thing and that can kill you as well too, because they look very close. And so hallucinogens can be a problem, but even worse in many cases with addictive potential and death is going to be synthetics. There's a couple common forms with that. Cannabinoids, which if people remember K2 and spice that used to be found at head shops or in local gas stations. This stuff is a chemical sprayed on the leafy substances, which in high enough concentrates have caused people to be violent, to harm themselves, to kill themselves, and have some very nasty reactions, okay? And so some people feel nothing because they get a weak batch. Some get a very concentrated amount, and they've gone so far as to killing themselves while they're doing that. So those are cannabinoids, highly dangerous. They're not like marijuana, so people think, well, it's it's synthetic and it's legal, but it's really not. They're legal cannabis. Sorry, the fake weed, whatever. It's not legal. Beyond that, too, are synthetic cannabinoids. These are things that a lot of times are derived either from like cot plant, or they're coming from just people manufacturing these things in labs, trying to create other types of highs. And some of the scariest ones are going to be flocka and bath salts. People have been known to like one guy. It sounds gross, so parents, if your kids are listening, have them plug their ears. People that have actually like chewed on other people's faces, things like that, really scary stuff, but as well major harm to themselves. And these are things that are also in the long run very damaging to your filter organs like your kidneys and liver. So we really have to watch some of these things, because even though we hear all the time about alcohol and tobacco and marijuana, these are things that right now in St. Clair County people are using, are getting access to. And if they start young, I know especially with meth, it's becoming a major issue in St. Clair County and has been for a while, especially more with adults. So even though our children are not registering that as much, it's out there. And I have worked with people 17 and 18 years old that have already dabbled in these things. So some scary stuff that's out there, Amy. Any other things I'm missing? Anything else you want to share before we look at ways that we can identify our children using?
Sure, if I could, real quick. I know that I don't think we mentioned inhalants at all. And I know with
Sure.
some of the younger kids, especially, and even, teens, high schoolers, another way they think is kind of safe or benign is to inhale things like glue, paint thinner, and even as simple as like some of the Cool Whip type, spray on like dessert topping.
Yeah, the whippets.
Yeah, to huff those types of things can be very harmful. Um, Symptoms might be euphoria, the child starts giddiness, unsteady gait, drowsiness,
Yeah.
almost maybe possibly like they are drunk, but then they can have like a headache. hallucinations, muscle spasms. But the scariest part of this is something as simple as sniffing glue, if you will, can actually lead to unconsciousness, coma, and death. People stop breathing altogether. And so it can be very, very dangerous. So just watch out for those types of items too.
And some of those chemicals are ototoxic, so they're damaging to the acoustic nerve. And so in cases, sometimes if you use too much, people can actually have hearing loss or go deaf. So it's another scary thing with that. But definitely this sudden death is a real risk there. And that is common. I know of people that have passed away as a result of huffing Freon or other things like that. So definitely got to watch that. Thank you for bringing that up, Amy.
Sure.
And one question that's commonly asked is, well, how am I going to know if my child's using? And sometimes it's a little bit harder to tell how they're using. Amy, what are some common ways that you can think of right off the bat to tell if your child's using any of these drugs?
Well, sometimes it starts out just with a suspicion from a parent, like you're acting strange or you're spending a lot of time in your room. You seem disengaged, and you maybe even just like a behavior change, or your child doesn't want to do the same things that they used to do. They will isolate a lot. Sometimes, and this is apart from the physical things you might notice, like red eyes, or, you know, they smell like liquor, or they're using a lot of cologne to cover up a smell from whatever they've been doing, or they start sneaking out or being caught like in simple lies that you don't think are a big deal at first, but then they turn into lying where they're at or where they are going, or whose friends they are at. And these are things to definitely take note of and not ignore. And sometimes we just, as parents, we want to put it off as normal teen behavior. They rebel, they act strange, they dress different, they try new and different things. So cologne's in right now, but these are things to definitely take note of, because um, if you're wrong, great. But if you're not, you want to catch these things early. And communication is so important with your child. I mean, you think your kid's best friend, but if you haven't talked to him in a while, friends change, music tastes changes all the time. And I just think communication is key to any relationship, especially when we've got our kids. They need to know that we care enough to talk to them. And like you've said before, Mike, ask open-ended questions, because otherwise, how was school? Fine. You're going to get one word answers, I guess. Okay, I don't know. And we want them to open up more. We want them to know that we're interested in their lives. We want to know if they're having difficulties at school and identify those problems early, or feelings of depression, like, yeah, I just don't want to do anything. And with COVID right now, kids are more isolated. Kids are very social people. And so without that connection, many students might feel like they need to cope and they're not sure how. And if they're not in school with, teachers and other leaders that rooted them on, and their regular routine and their friends and social groups, well, they sometimes can turn to, hey, maybe this our drug mindset, our medication mindset will help me feel better. And so we need to catch any of that early. And we've got counseling information and such on our resources afterwards. But those are some of the things I guess I would look for. Do you have any more of like the physical maybe that you want to, or anything you want to add, Mike?
Yeah, I would say when it comes to physical, um, sometimes rapid weight loss could be, if people are using stimulants, they will decrease their weight excessively. I've had people lose as much as 200 pounds over a short period of time because they stop eating because they're using. So extreme weight loss could be an issue. Looking for marks on their arms or other parts of their body, like, with needle use. Sometimes problems with their nose, like bloody noses, constantly picking at their nose. Sometimes when people are actually high, they think they have bugs on them, so they might pick at their skin in one spot. And so if they got excessive blisters or sores from picking, that could be it. And also the eyes. In a lot of cases, you're going to see dilated pupils when people are using stimulants, or pinpoint pupils, especially when they're using an opiate and a fixed gaze. And if you've been around it long enough, you can tell. So those are some of the examples we're talking about. And when we come in next week, we're going to actually look at ways that our children can conceal using clothing, other devices, everyday household items in order to try to hide their use. And so we hope you've enjoyed this. If you have any questions, please comment in the discussion box below. You can like us on Facebook. You can follow us on Instagram. You can also email us at speak@stclaircounty.org and let us know what you're thinking. But thank you for watching.